Okay, colleagues, I think we could start. Yeah, first of all, thank you for finding your time and making yourself available for this discussion because today we have not the first, I think it's already like the third conversation dedicated to the topic of role of sustainable finance and ESG in particular and shaping our, let's say, green and resilient future. And today we're going to talk about ESG models, which means how to, let's say, use existing environmental, social problems to transform them into real business models. Yeah, today we have Mартін Б'єррегаард and Steve Rowan. Yeah, both of them are very experienced experts and practitioners. And yeah, we will try to build up our conversation around their real cases or real experiences. First of all, yeah, I will pass the floor to Martin after a short introduction, because we worked with Martin very closely at UNDP in Kiev, and our main, let's say, concern was about what to do with the debris that is being produced as a result of demolition of destroyed or let's say damaged buildings near Kiev, like Irpin, Bucha, and Borodyanka. So this was, let's say, our real case on the ground with in Ukraine. So I think Martin will have enough stuff to share, and then I will pass the floor to Steve because Steve will be talking mostly about the monitoring and monitoring reporting system and including management of related information flows around environmental social aspects. So first of all, I will maybe give a short introduction to the topic. It's basically not a new approach, and we're not going to talk about this topic for the first time. I think the kickstart to this conversation was given by John Elkington in 1994. Let's say in last century, and this was actually the first attempt to draw attention to potential options and possibilities arising from transforming environmental social problems into the real business models. Then the entire stuff evolved into the concept of blended value creation, also introduced by one of the more or less famous scientist and practitioner, Jed Emerson. And now we're having our real situation on the ground, and we all see how badly our, let's say, economy and social life is affected by the ongoing conflict. So which basically leads us to the same question: how we could use this momentum and to build up and create new business models around this, let's say, set of or list of available challenges that we have. So first of all, again, I'm going to maybe repeat a bit what was said at the very beginning. I will pass the floor first to Martin, and Martin, I hope you will have enough information to share with our colleagues, basically from what we did at UNDP, and then I'm going to pass the floor to Steve, and then we will have a Q&A session. So Martin, over to you.
Great, thank you, Sasha. Thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in here towards the end of the day. I hope you've all had a good day. My area of specialism is waste and debris, which is just obviously one element of many elements within the whole environmental bandwidth. So within the ESG, and when we're talking business models, I will focus for this session on debris from the damaged buildings created from the ongoing invasion. I think if we look at Ukraine and business models that could be applicable for waste and debris, Ukraine has not been the best at waste management in the past. there is the solid waste management regime is not enforced, and I have to say that the waste management is typically not dealt with in a proper way. We have a lot of dump sites, we have a lot of landfills that aren't functioning as they should be and have environmental impact. So the reason I say that is that the mindset shift required now that we're coming and talking about the current situation and hopefully soon a recovery phase, is that if we're going to be having an ESG business model, we need to appreciate that waste and debris needs to be managed better. And also with EU accession coming at us very soon, that's another stimulant to improve the procedures for how we handle waste and debris. So I think one of the key things for a business model to take into account is the mindset shift from just dump it to, instead of just dumping it, what can I do with this debris? So in the past, C&D waste, which is construction demolition waste, has typically not been recycled in Ukraine. Now, that being said, there are huge opportunities. So there are lots of different business models that could be applied to the amount of debris that we now have in Ukraine, of which there's potentially more than 50 million tons. And that debris, in many other countries, it's kind of similar to C&D waste, construction demolition waste, which is a viable business in many countries, the recycling of that. But we should start backwards. So what we typically would do is to say, okay, for a business model, who is buying this product, let's say, so the recycled debris? Who is the customer? Because if we don't have a customer, if we don't have somebody who's going to buy the recycled debris, once you've been through all the processes, then there's no point in recycling it. Then we may as well be disposing of it, but we have to do it properly. So let's start with the back end. Who is the customer? What specifications would they apply to a recycled material? And this isn't just for debris. This is generally, anyway, for recycling any type of waste. What are the specifications? What are the regulations we need in place to enable the customer to buy this material? Because it's not just about the material meeting their specifications or their requirements. It's also, since it was a waste, it needs to go in legislation out of being a waste into becoming a material. So you have end of waste. So there's customer demand. What specifications are they wanting? What regulatory and legislation do we need in place in order to enable the customer to even buy it and use it as well? So again, when we look at new buildings, new roads that are going to be using recycled debris, it's the insurers that of the new building. Will the insurance agree to the building if it has recycled material in it? Is the financing, will the financing agree to using recycled materials? So you see, in the ESG business modeling for something like waste recycling, that's where we start our focus, because we need to have the outlet. And then we can work through the chain of events. And then we can work through to, okay, so if this is the specification we need to create, if this is the market demand, these are the quantities, this is what they want to use it for. Then we get into the processing. So what technology do we need? Is it a private sector that will do this? Will a private sector invest in this? Now, for a private sector to invest, they obviously need some assurance in the market demand. We're back to who's the market? Is there a demand before they invest? And that also requires a very stable regulation. They don't want any surprises. Private investors into ESG, or even any investor, public and private, into ESG, does not want any surprises in the regulation. So we need to have that bottomed out. So let's say we have private investment. We also have a lot of national, international, EBRD, World Bank, different private equities loaning in investment as well, both to private and public sector. There's also obviously a public-private partnership approach, whereby a private company can have the mandate or the license to recycle the debris in a city where the city council has given them the 10-15-year mandate, and then the recycling investment can come because they've got the 10-year contract, they've got the regulatory assurances and everything, they know the product they need to use. Okay, now the business model is starting to come together. So then you then start looking at the capabilities, the skills and skills training. Where's the technology coming from? It's going to have to come from outside of Ukraine, because crushing and recycling debris is different to stone and quarry crushing, because there's different materials in it. And this brings us to another key element. We have a lot of asbestos in Ukraine. The records show that 70% or more of all the buildings in Ukraine have some asbestos in their construction. Now, asbestos in debris is a big no-no globally. However, there are some research projects going on to see whether you could remain a bit of asbestos in the debris to create large concrete blocks, maybe for defense and everything else. So as a business model, need to tap into these different elements of the technology and whether the technology can deal with the raw material that we have, which is the debris. And you may need to add on some additional technology which hasn't really been developed yet, i.e. how to separate mechanically the asbestos from the debris. So there's a little byproduct mini opportunity for somebody investing as well. 50 million tons is a huge amount. And the demand for recycled materials is going to be, for reconstruction materials, is going to be huge in Ukraine. And the quarries, if you're a quarry operator, you're in business. And the prices, all post-conflict, post-disaster, prices for raw materials like quarry, gravel, it doubles, if not triples. And that helps the ESG models, because the recycled material then can have a proper pricing, a proper price. It doesn't have to compete with today's quarry materials, because we know those quarry material prices are going to go up. But you don't want to be competing with the quarries as well. So there are some models and business models in the past where the debris recycling has joined with the quarries so that they blend their materials. So instead of it being, you could blend 25% of recycled material into the raw material as well. So instead of trying to compete, there's something called the Copenhagen model, which is where Copenhagen back in the 80s, they asked the quarry operators to do the C&D, the debris recycling, and market as part and parallel next to their quarry materials. So you're looking at business models that aren't looking to compete necessarily with the quarries, but are looking to join forces. So you see, there's lots of different nuances, I think, when it comes to something like the debris and what sort of business models can be. And you've also got more and more, you've got the opportunities to demonstrate the carbon footprint or the carbon reduction by using recycled materials compared to concrete. There's lots of studies out there. So if you want to tap into funding that has a climate tag attached to it, you can now, through some research as well, you can find ways to demonstrate that the recycled material has a lower carbon footprint than the quarried material. And this is especially true when we start looking at cement and everything else. So you've got lots of different instruments you could financial instruments in order to find the funding. Just taking one element out of the whole of the recovery for Ukraine, that element being debris, a small element, just taking that, you'll see that there are lots of different, quite exciting new ways of creating a business around what to do with the debris. The alternative is we dump all the debris in nature. We take up land that's economically valuable, i.e. farmland, agricultural. We create flood risks. We create a risk of contamination of groundwater because the debris has in it waste that can seep through into the ground waste as leachate. So if the alternative is to dump 50 million tons in the nature of Ukraine, that I would say is just not an alternative. We have to recycle this debris. And therefore there is already the baseline for motivation to do that. That was some of the things, Sasha, I was thinking about when you mentioned ESG and business models. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, in fact, thank you, Martin. Maybe to let's say add something important at this stage. And this is exactly what you mentioned, because when we're talking about reconstruction, we have to bear in mind that sustainability doesn't mean always resilience. So this is exactly what you was referring to when we're using let's say recycled materials to build up new buildings or reconstruct buildings. Then the insurance companies, when they will be coming into the game, they will be checking up whether all these buildings they are, they say, secure and they could provide this insurance coverage. So this is again the old story, and I think everybody who had the chance to take a look at this draft law dedicated to green reconstruction in Ukraine, which is being drafted right now by the Ministry of Environment Protection. For those of you who let's say who was able to take a look at this document, you would be able to see immediately that there is a very clear let's say focus on let's say on environmentally sustainable activities, but there is literally no mentioning about the necessity to link all these activities to more resilience. So how you can make sure that all our activities will be at the end contributing to more resilience and to, let's say, to better preparedness to any kind of let's say new challenges that we, let's say, obviously our country is going to face, because our neighbor will be still there even in 10 years, 15 years. So we cannot change our location by let's say making a wish and moving to any other places. But maybe at this stage, maybe I could. Yeah, Martin. Yeah. Go ahead.
Steve, I'll be 10 seconds, Steve. Sorry. No, but you're right, and resilience. But I should also mention that part of the EU, I mean, in the EU, you have to recycle at least 70% of your C&D waste, and that's going to increase. If Ukraine at the moment is at 0%, to get EU accession, this is one of the stepping stones towards the obligation. So if we can recycle the debris, it's the same technology as C&D waste. Therefore, we are helping the accession into the EU and meeting those requirements that are going to be set upon us. So it's a part, you say resilience, but also it's part of the stepping stone towards that. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Steve, I stole some of yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. And Steve, now it's your turn to bring some agreement into the story regarding the monitoring, reporting, and management of all this relevant data. So, Steve, over to you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here talking to you all. I think, firstly, if we go back to basics, back to first principles, and say, well, why is ESG performance even important to an organization? You know, whether it's a commercial organization or a government institution, why is it important? But certainly within the commercial sector, one of the first things is having a good ESG management. It builds trust and credibility with, whether that's with customers, with regulators, with other business partners, suppliers, investors, and let's not forget employees as well. People want to work at a place where, you know, where the company that employs them is looking after the environment and looking after the community within which they operate. It also attracts and retains investment. There's a huge amount of competition for money, especially development funding. And it's going to be very important in the reconstruction activities in Ukraine, for example, that you know, this money will be deployed preferentially into projects that have good ESG credentials. And President Zelensky did make a comment a while back about the reconstruction of Ukraine's power infrastructure would preferentially be, you know, green, renewable energy where possible. Which is a good thing from an ESG perspective, but it's also quite a smart move, because most of the money that's available will preferentially go to those types of energy projects. So having that a good ESG story around that is very important. It strengthens regulatory compliance, because of fundamental good G. The G in ESG is governance, so a fundamental aspect of good ESG performance is compliance with local regulations and international best practice and expectations. It drives operational improvements. To manage ESG properly, you need to understand the business properly. You need to analyze the business properly, and in doing that, you also identify operational improvements, and you identify opportunities to reduce resource usage, for example, or energy efficiency, or to reduce some pollution, environmental risk. In the process of analyzing the business, you find opportunities, and you will find production efficiencies and improvements. I'll give you a very brief example. So one of my clients for 17 years was Rolls-Royce Motor Cars. They make these luxury vehicles, and they have a chrome plating line that used phenomenal amounts of water, huge quantities of water as part of the process. So we analyzed why is so much water being used. And when we got down to it, and we spoke to all the personnel, we spoke to the production manager, the chemists, etc., what we discovered was that in 1972, when the plating shop was first built, the manager of the plating shop just had a policy of empty all the water tanks at the end of every shift and refill them at the next shift. It was like a clean desk policy. But that was fine in 1972 when water was very cheap and available. But move forward to 2012, that was no longer acceptable. And it turns out there was no good technical reason for that. It was just a legacy from a previous era that nobody had checked and nobody had analyzed. So, by looking into an organization as part of the ESG process, you will find production efficiencies. It enables continuous improvement and accountability, because ESG is not a destination; it's an integral part of the company's operations, and it enhances competitive advantage. There's a lot of pressure on the supply chain to achieve supply chain decarbonization, for example. So the tier one purchasers of goods and services will preferentially buy from organizations that have good ESG credentials. It supports resilience and long-term value creation, because ESG management becomes part of the business DNA. It's not a side project or an initiative that dies off. It becomes part of the operational DNA of an organization, and it reduces greenwashing risks, which moves us on to looking at some of the management systems and documentation. So it's quite easy to make a statement from an ESG perspective. We'll do this or we'll do that. It's much more difficult to verify and to achieve that objective and to verify it. So this is where structured management systems come into play. So there are a range. The International Standards Organization, you have ISO 14001, which is an environmental management system standard. You have ISO 45001, which is health and safety. ISO 26000, social responsibility. There's lots of these standards, and we're not saying that an organization has to subscribe to those standards and become a registered company with the badge and the certificate. But these standards do form a useful template to work from. Whether you go to the full process of certification is a commercial decision quite often, because maybe that gives you elevated status in the supply chain. So the objective isn't to get certification. The objective is to have a standard, to have a system, a documented management system in place, and that helps the ESG journey and achievement, because first of all, it helps you set in a systematic way objectives and targets and quantifiable targets. To say, there's one thing to say, as an organization, we're going to reduce our waste to landfill, but that's pretty meaningless. That could be 1 ton, or it could be 100,000 tons. You need to set a numerical value to that. So the objective would be, we're going to reduce our waste to landfill. The target might be, we're going to reduce it by 10% or 20% per annum, whatever's appropriate for that organization. But in ESG documented management systems enable you to set that framework and set those objectives and targets. It also facilitates stakeholder engagement, because you have to identify your stakeholders, you have to document them, you have to keep a registry of stakeholders, so you know who you're dealing with, whether it's within the community, whether it's within the commercial sector. But you have a catalog, an inventory of your stakeholders. It also provides consistent approach. And this is particularly important where you have perhaps an organization has multiple sites and you want a consistent approach to each issue. So you want to manage, you know, taking waste, for example, you want to manage waste consistently on each site. You want to manage, you know, dust control or water control, whatever it happens to be. You should have a consistent process, and having it documented and in a, you know, a regularized manner enables consistency, and it provides for example, the development of standard operating procedures. So those same procedures can be applied on 5 different construction sites or operational sites, but having it documented enables or supports consistency. A documented system also identifies roles and responsibilities. You know, again, within an organization, you know, it's all well and good to say, well, we protect the environment or we look after health and safety, etc. That won't actually happen unless you have people with designated roles and responsibilities within the organization, and that there is a clear reporting structure and lines of communication. And that needs to go all the way to board level. You know, this is a key thing with these documented management systems. It applies to everyone, and it must include the board. If the leadership don't sign off, doesn't matter how well the employees or the staff try and deal with it, it's going to fail. It has to be fully endorsed by all persons within an organization. It also creates a compliance and corrective action tracking regime or culture, so that, you know, there will be systematic internal audits and examination of, again, whether it's waste or material storage or use of personal protective equipment or whatever the E&S issue is that's being audited. The idea is over, say, a period of a year, all of those aspects of the organization will be audited. And if there are failings in the management of those issues, that becomes a corrective action, which is documented. What was wrong? Where is it? How are we going to fix it? Who fixed it? When did they fix it by? All this becomes documented as part of the organization's management and continuous improvement. It also helps set key performance indicators, again, whether it's waste reduction or water reduction or the number of people who've gone through some particular training or community outreach programs, etc. These can all be set as formalized performance indicators that can be assessed, audited, checked. And back to the beginning of the discussion, it allows for third-party certification of your system if that's what the organization wants to do. But that provides a useful external audit role, which sometimes focuses an organization. If it's not externally certified, and sometimes these management systems, they drift into disrepair, whereas if it's externally audited every year and fully recertified every 3 years, there's a much stronger emphasis on keeping the system moving forward. And then importantly, in terms of the point we made about greenwashing, it creates a transparent reporting framework. And there are numerous, you know, compliance schemes and reporting schemes, and it depends on the organization and the sector. But fundamentally, what it's doing is it's making an organization say, here is our approach to ESG. Here is how we manage it. Here's how we've monitored it. Here's the data to back that up, and that then gets put out into a third party verification or into the public sector to be scrutinized. So that means that the ESG initiatives need to be real, not just, you know, greenwashing and saying we do something. And the other important thing about management systems, documented management systems, is they're scalable and repeatable. So an organization can start off on one site with 100 people, could grow to 10 sites and 5,000 people. The management system should grow with the business. And it should be designed so it has that flexibility, so that no matter which sectors the business is in, which geography the sites are located in, whatever the environmental or social issues are, that they're all, you know, that they're all managed in this consistent, systematic, transparent way. And it's going to be important for Ukraine and the reconstruction programs, just because there'll be lots of organizations who will get involved. You know, There's going to be EPC contractors are going to be building things. There's going to be new companies will be starting up. There's the energy providers. There's all the other, water infrastructure, the waste infrastructure. And there's a whole supply chain around that. It's important that all of these organizations can show that they have control of their environmental and social performance, and that they can demonstrate that. And that, in terms of a holistic benefit to Ukraine, makes access to funding, access to finance for the reconstruction much more available. And it also makes it available quicker, because if there are gaps in those systems, if an organization, even though the project might be a good project, if there are gaps in the management systems of the organization delivering the project, that will slow down the release of funds for the delivery of the project. So it's really important to understand that these frameworks are critical to the development of a competent ESG management scenario for any organization. But that's my, probably slightly longer than 10 minutes, but that's my overview of the importance of these systems. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Maybe just to make this conversation even more interesting for part of our participants coming from the banks, because the banks right now are looking for new green and sustainable financial products. And basically what Martin started with was exactly one of the areas where these products could be developed. But then you, Steve, added exactly what should be considered as well, the KPIs or the indicators that should be also considered when you're thinking or trying to elaborate this product, because what the EU has already done, there is a system of let's say interlinked regulations where you will find not only like thematic areas, but also you will find even like the process step by step how to develop this product if you're a bank or you're an insurance company, and to make sure that this product is sustainable and has all relevant indicators. So unfortunately, Ukraine is still lagging behind. And for the banks, and the banks are asking at least National Bank of Ukraine or the government of Ukraine to develop this set of rules, so to speak, to make connection between people on the ground dealing with these new business models and the banks sitting on the pile of money, so to speak. How to bridge those two shores, which is again, first of all, about understanding the business model and understanding the potential of implementing this business model, and knowing how to attach a potential product or program within the bank to specific KPIs, and how to collect this information, which is again about the system of collecting data and the stuff like this. But maybe at this stage, I will pass the floor to participants. Maybe somebody has already a question or clarification question, maybe some rough idea how to let's say use this momentum, and then maybe to brainstorm on potential new products. So colleagues, over to you.
Nope.
Nope. Let's say, yeah, it's on one hand it could be a good sign, on the other hand it's a bad sign. well, let's say it could be so that everything is clear, or that let's say we were talking about something very difficult. Yeah, but actually, yes, from my side, my question would be to you, Martin, and to you, Steve, maybe how, let's say, where do you see potential for this new, let's say, business models, ESG business models in Ukraine aside of debris? Maybe you have something else in mind which could be interesting for the banks, because again, banks are here. Let's say they're part of this event, and maybe we could brainstorm here to use this momentum.
I think something Steve was talking about was very interesting for me, which is along the lines of not just saying, for example, we're going to reduce waste to landfill, but putting targets on it. And I think what could really stimulate maybe the business environment in Ukraine would be if the Ukraine government put forward the targets for the next 10 years, let's say, and indicators along the ESG to support ESG investments, but also to be aligned with the whole green recovery. And you were talking about it, Sasha, as well. So some real quantifiable targets. And in my little world, I just work with this little waste debris. If the government came forward and says, right, in 5 years' time, 25% is to be recycled, and in 10 years' time, 50% is to be recycled, and the banks would then see that and go, okay, businesses or cities or municipalities that come to us with ventures, we can see how the investment will firstly benefit sustainability and the environment, but also will be financially viable, and also will meet these targets because all the different stakeholders will be focused towards these targets. So maybe some concrete, but I think that that's quite ambitious, maybe, but it would certainly help. I don't know if Steve, that was you were talking about the Rolls-Royce, you were talking about some of your clients, just not being too vague, but putting some real numbers to them. Over.
Yes, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. It's like any performance system. If you don't quantify, if you don't provide quantification, then you can't achieve anything. You have to. It can't be done by vague statements. It has to be quantifiable. And to make something quantifiable, you have to be able to measure it first and decide what you're going to measure and how you're going to measure it and what the veracity of that data is. And then you set your targets so that when you remeasure, you can demonstrate you've achieved those targets. Well, I think that in relation to that, and in particular in the waste management sector, as you know, Martin, and as you alluded to, it's a classic kind of carrot and stick sector insofar as if you do not have effective regulation and enforcement of the waste sector, then it doesn't naturally move towards recycling and reuse and beneficial use of materials. It will tend to gravitate toward, well, let's just dump it in an old landfill site somewhere. So the Ukrainian regulatory agencies need to be effective, both in terms of having the legislative tools to penalize organizations for undesirable activities, but also in terms of the effectiveness of enforcement. I've seen many jurisdictions, I'm sure you have, Martin, where on paper there are regulations that say you can't do this and you can't do that, but in practice nobody's going around inspecting it or enforcing it, or if they do, $1,000 later the problem's disappeared. So that's the kind of the stick side of the equation. The other thing that is quite often a constraint on the development of a sophisticated waste market is having the right commercial setup. Again, if it's cheap and doesn't cost much to go and throw a load of stuff outside of a site somewhere, then that's what you're going to do. If, however, it becomes expensive doing that, and as we have in the UK, for example, where sending stuff to landfill now is quite an expensive undertaking, and there's lots of other things to do with it instead. If you create that financial incentive, then what will happen is the investment markets will then find companies that will come in and will build the aggregate recycling plants, the recycling facilities, the reuse facilities, because those private sector waste management companies won't come into a market where there is ineffective regulation and where there are not sufficient commercial drivers to make it profitable for them. Because at the end of the day, they're a business; they're there to make a profit. It's not just an altruistic. Let's do something good with waste. So if you can create the environment for them, then they will invest, and then you create the market. And then when you have projects going forward that have all this material, then there are places for it to go, or for it to be used in a variety of beneficial ways, as Martin outlined. So that's one area where you could, things could be improved.
Yeah, and maybe one provocative question from my side, because with Martin, we faced this problem, let's say, a couple of times, because before going into any ESG models while doing the reconstruction or demolition of the debris and the sites, you have to deal with the contamination or potential contamination of those sites with unexploded ordnance or the explosive materials. Maybe it's the question to both of you, maybe Martin and Steve. What's your take on that? Is it only a barrier, or could we also use this ESG lens to transform it into something valuable and maybe facilitate generation of additional value, or maybe let's say implementation of new business models? Because again, contamination level is quite high, and in some cases it stops us and the banks, for example, from providing loans and credits. Again, from your perspective, is the ESG a tool which could be used to really transform it from the problem, from a problem to an opportunity?
Well, I think the problem, it certainly can be an opportunity, because if we look at other countries, well, so the key problem is asbestos. And if we look at other countries currently, also Gaza is also having huge amounts of debris. Lebanon has huge amounts of debris with asbestos, and Gaza with asbestos. And they don't have the technical background for this challenge, whereas Ukraine has a very strong engineering background. Don't get me wrong, Lebanon and Gaza are full of good engineers and everything, but I'm just thinking from a construction industry point of view. And I think if Ukraine has the opportunity to develop some systems and procedures and technologies for a specific huge problem that will grow globally, the more urbanization we have, and the more destruction we have in urban settings, the whole issue around asbestos and debris, for example, will be a huge challenge going forward. And so if Ukraine, if you say turn this into an opportunity, I think if Ukraine has developed some technologies to deal with this, then there's certainly an export market as well. So you're turning a liability into an asset, which is where it's at. So yes, Sasha, from my point of view, there's an opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Asbestos is particularly problematic. I mean, you have, and we've done a lot of work in Iraq and in the Balkans, for example, where there has been a lot of conflict-related damage to infrastructure, and a lot of where it's chemical contamination. It's it can be identified by analysis, sampling and analysis programs, etc. And then you can to some extent separate out the contaminated material from the uncontaminated material. Again, where there are hydrocarbons involved, there's ways of cleaning that, or there's ways of identifying and separating it out. Asbestos is much more difficult, and is it does create more of a problem in the reuse scenario. But nonetheless, there are solutions. There are innovative solutions, and it does, from a just from an overall sustainability point of view, this material is perfectly good construction aggregate for reconstruction purposes, and opportunities to use it should be found rather than being disposed of. And it's as Martin said, there's a whole market involved in that in itself. But there will be, what it will require is careful assessment and analysis of the materials, and that in itself creates an opportunity in that there need to be good laboratory facilities available. What you don't want to be doing in Ukraine, as happens in Iraq, for example, where we work a lot, we're constantly having to send samples out of country, shipping them through Germany back to the UK just to have them analysed. If there was a good analysis lab or several good analysis labs within the country, they would have a lot of work, because there's a lot of material testing required to ensure that these materials can be used effectively, and that you're minimizing the amount of suitable material that then you have to find an alternative solution for. And even where it's asbestos contaminated, potentially on some sites it can still be, can be used in landscaping or covered, or used for some, as long as it's buried, and it's all about managing the asbestos risk during the construction phase then, as opposed to the long-term risk if it's buried on the site or covered in some concrete hard surface, etc. But yeah, having good analysis laboratory facilities would be a great benefit for the construction works going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Martin and Steve. I'm already receiving messages from Jana telling me that we are already over the schedule. Okay, maybe let's say last messages from you, Martin, from Steve, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think one of the key things you said, Sasha, was there's opportunity here in this crisis, and I fully appreciate and acknowledge everything that you're going through. It's horrendous, and there are some opportunities to come from it, and I think the ESG models would be one of the most prominent ones, looking for EU accession, looking to tap into all the financing there is in the ESG world. I think there's lots of opportunities. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, my closing comment would be that the flow of funding follows the ESG. So the better the ESG management credentials, the easier it is to access the funding that will be necessary, and the quicker that funding becomes released to put these projects into practice and ultimately get to where we'd all like Ukraine to be.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Steve. So the key message again: ESG is a nice tool to transform problems into opportunities, and also a very important tool to, let's say, monitor and report on the results achieved, and to understand to which extent me as a economic agent or any kind of company is resilient or ready to any challenges related to environmental, social, and governance problem. So if there are no comments from the audience, so we could wrap up and close. Okay, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, colleagues, for finding your time and making yourself available, and looking forward to any other opportunities to talk about this topic. Thank you, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.